The purpose of the Old Testament's wisdom literature is well captured by the prologue to the book of Proverbs, Proverbs 1 through 7. And to paraphrase, its purpose is to make the reader wise. And so the next question is, what does wisdom mean in the Old Testament and indeed in the Bible as a whole? And I would say that there are three dimensions to biblical wisdom: practical, and then ethical, and finally theological. Many people are most acquainted with the practical dimension of wisdom. Basically, wisdom is there to help you do the right thing at the right time, to say the right thing at the right time, in order to maximize the benefit of a situation. So this is particularly true in the book of Proverbs, of course, where we get a lot of proverbs that encourage people to certain behaviors and attitudes, like take Proverbs 10. One of the first proverbs says, "Lazy hands are soon poor, hard workers get rich." This proverb is encouraging people not to be lazy, because if you're lazy, you're going to be poor. And so what I'm describing as practical wisdom is very similar to what we might call emotional intelligence today, or social skills, street smarts. And I want to quickly point out that the advice that's given is not guaranteeing or promising that you will get the benefits, but it is telling you the best route to a desired conclusion, all other things being equal. And also, I want to, at this point, say that Proverbs are not always true. I know that sounds kind of radical, but if you think about it, in Proverbs chapter 26, verses 4 and 5, you have Proverbs that begin, do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you will be like him yourself, followed by answer a fool according to his folly, or he'll be wise in his own eyes. So the point is that Proverbs are true when applied in the right situation. So somebody who is wise not only knows the proverb, but also knows how to evaluate a situation and to read people. Secondly, wisdom is ethical. A wise person is a good person. And you might see as you read through the book of Proverbs how wisdom is sometimes correlated with righteousness. In other words, as one dimension of that is the fact that you can't manipulate people. There's some people who know how to read people, know how to read a situation, and then they manipulate people to get what they want at the disadvantage of the other person. And, the ethical dimension of wisdom is also seen in its relationship to the law. It's interesting that in the first 9 chapters, often what we call wisdom is also correlated with Torah and mitzvot and words like that are like the law. And if you read through the Proverbs, you can see that many of them are reflections of the 10 commandments, particularly the final 6 commandments that talk about the relationship between people. And then finally, and this actually gets us into the theological dimension of wisdom, but the third quality or perspective or dimension of wisdom is theological. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So in this way, Proverbs 1:7, but also Proverbs 9:10, and many times in between, we learn that you can't be considered wise according to the Bible unless you have the right relationship with God that's defined by fearing him. Now, a lot of people are kind of put off going, wait a minute, fear God, why not love God? And isn't this an Old Testament thing? And the answer is no. The New Testament also calls us to fear God. One example would be that passage in the middle of Philippians 2, which says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. So we see that with that addition of fear and trembling, that the fear of the Lord is something different than simple respect, and probably different than awe or reverence, which leads people to wonder. And of course, we are to hold God in awe and reverence, but the fear of the Lord is an acknowledgement that God is our creator and our sustainer, and that we're not the center of the universe. So that we have this fear that doesn't make us run away, but rather has us listen to God. As God speaks in the book of Proverbs, say, through the Father, and also through woman wisdom. And that's a whole nother theological dimension, because in Proverbs chapter 9, you see that the reader is called upon to make a choice between whether to dine with woman wisdom or to dine with woman folly. And both their houses are on the highest point of the city, which is where in ancient Israel the temple would be found. So woman wisdom represents Yahweh, and woman folly represents the false gods and goddesses that are trying to lure Israel away. So that's the wisdom literature. I've been focusing in on Proverbs, but I'll throw in both Ecclesiastes and Job right now real quickly. This is their main theme. This is what they're trying to, and in terms of contemporary relevance, basically everything I've said about Proverbs on all three dimensions are immensely relevant for us today. We should fear God. We should choose to dine with woman wisdom, who represents Yahweh. We should cultivate our righteousness. And we should also learn from our experiences how to read certain situations and people to apply the principles that we find. But you'll remember that in the book of Ecclesiastes, it ends. The real punchline in the book of Ecclesiastes, the last two verses, where the father says to his son, fear God and obey the commandments and live in the light of the future judgment. And of course, the book of Job is a story of a person whose fear deepens through his experience of suffering and ultimately a deeper knowledge of God. At the end of the book of Job, Job says, I've heard of you now that I've seen you. And so he's had a deeper experience of God, and he fears God at the beginning. He is wise at the beginning, but he has a deeper relationship with God and a more profound fear of God through his experience of God, where he says at the end that he had heard of him, now he has seen him, and now he chooses to suffer in silence, to stop the charge that God is somehow unjust, but simply to trust him in the midst of his suffering. And you might remember at this point, he doesn't even know that he will be restored. To dive deeper into the subject of the fear of God and the nature of wisdom literature, I have written a book called The Fear of the Lord is Wisdom, a theological introduction to wisdom literature in the Old Testament, plus commentaries on Proverbs, Job, and Ecclesiastes.